Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. Normally, we try to counter program during big news events and do if there's a big presidential debate, we'll do a special episode on crop rotation in the 14th century just to spite the gods. But we figured this is a time where there's enough newsy stuff, and I've been out of it, and we had to air some evergreens, that I had to sort of say, let's just lean into this and do something more on the news. And I said, let's get Pod back on here. For those of you who don't know Pod, John Podhoretz, he's the editor of Commentary, dear friend of mine, co-host of the Glop podcast, which every young baby boomer and aging Gen Xer should listen to, or maybe does. I'm not sure. Yeah. And one of the reasons I did not know this at the time, because I hadn't listened to it yet, but then people emailed me about it or DM'd me about it. The Commentary podcast, which is of course must listening, did a special spur of the moment, unplanned reaction to the inauguration. And the last time I had John on here, we had a little bit of a contretemps, because I thought he was too ebullient, and the Commentary team was too effervescent in their enthusiasms about a Trump win, which looked like it was coming. And he said, no, not too ebullient, not too effervescent, but I dislike Harris more than I hate Trump, and yada yada yada, and this is the better outcome. And now I have to say, having listened to the first half of the Commentary podcast this morning, from Inauguration Day, if ebullience or enthusiasm wasn't the best adjective 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I think it applies now. This was a very excited group of people.
Once again, I disagree. Once again, I got to disagree with you. So okay. That first of all, let's just play a little podcasting scheduling game. Mm-hmm. So we decided we were going to do an immediate reaction. So we did that literally 15 minutes after the speech was over. So we did not have the entirety of the first day to reckon with. Fair. And of course, the day ended in a disgraceful fashion with the pardoning of the January 6th, the convicted January 6th criminals, which I think is a disgrace. I think we had a little exchange there. You could make a case perhaps for commutations on the grounds that a lot of these people served 4 years for crimes that were not prosecuted. There were worse political crimes committed in 2020 and went totally unprosecuted than the events that happened in the Capitol, and that everybody got their just desserts and it's time to move on, or something like that. If he had commuted,
which I think everyone expected, 1,500 of them instead of 1,600 of them, we wouldn't be having this conversation about this part of it.
Even there, you could make the claim that would not be right, because that was an.
But it wouldn't be outrageous in the way that some of these are.
Right. Yeah. So we were merely reacting to the speech and not to the further events of the day. And I think there was much to be optimistic about in the text of the speech. And so I said there were two things about it: that the speech began with a criticism of the essentially liberal governing political establishment in the United States, because they had lost the ability to be effective as governors, and not just Gavin Newsom as a governor, but as he said, it's been 6 months. People are still suffering in North Carolina from a hurricane that happened 6 months ago, and look at California and look at the condition of the country. These people have been in charge for the last 4 years, and in some ways for the last 25 years, and they can't get anything done right. And that's why I got elected. I thought, whoa, that's, first of all, that's right. So that's that's right. True. Yeah. And that if he were focused like a laser beam on the idea that his presidency will alter the course of American history if he proves somehow to be able to govern more competently than the blue state model has governed things, as Walter Russell Mead calls it, for the last 25 years, that this really will be a transformational presidency. And in talking about the role of liberal ideology in playing a part in that, which is wokeness, DEI, gender stuff, and tying that together with it, that I think was grounds for a certain amount of enthusiasm.
Okay.
However, I don't think that, and the focus on immigration is what it is, and he left off birthright citizenship and some of the more controversial things. I don't think it was a very good speech. I do think that it's a moment where you can sort of appeal to the higher, the better angels of our nature, and he didn't do that. And it's an unfortunate thing because it's one opportunity you have in 4 years where basically people are like, all right, let's see where you're going to go with this. And for us more ideologized people, it went in very exciting places, I think. But for people who are much less political, I'm not sure that it had the effect that one hopes an inaugural will have, which is to make people feel good about the country going forward and to say, let's give these people a chance. Let's see where they go. It's a new start. It's a new beginning, particularly with a change in president, because we have rejected the course of the last presidency. Then the rest of the day happened. Which did involve the pardons and did involve the announcement of the ending of birthright citizenship and did involve the suspension, the completely illegal suspension of a duly passed law, ending, saying that TikTok had to be sold or would be shut down. Like, he doesn't have the power to say, I'm suspending that law for 75 days. We do not live in a banana republic. He can't do that. I don't really know what goes on from that. And I think the birthright citizenship stuff is an open and shut 9-0 Supreme Court decision. And it's a waste of America's time that we are mucking around with the properly convicted and disbarred John Eastman's idiotic notion that he found one senator in 1866 who said there shouldn't be birthright citizenship during the debate over the 14th Amendment, and that he therefore, proved that there shouldn't be birthright citizenship when the only Supreme Court decision on the books found 6-2 that there was such a thing as birthright citizenship. And not to monologize here, but the dissenting opinion in that 6-2 decision in the Wong case in 1898 said, and I'm not kidding, that the reason that we should not be naturalizing Chinese, the children of Chinese born people who are born in the United States is that they have to properly be considered the subjects of the Chinese emperor. That under China's law and under understood law dating back, for whatever, these people are subjects of a foreign emperor. We don't believe that people are subjects of other people on this planet in 2024, 2025. And you can't go back to that dissent and say, oh, and by the way, Harlan, who was the dissenter in Plessy versus Ferguson, was one of the two dissenters. So you can't go back and say, this is like Plessy versus Ferguson, that this is the decision that was right and Plessy was wrong. And 50 years later, the Supreme Court had to fix it. The Supreme Court has no stomach for this. There is no reason to believe that Kavanaugh, Barrett, Roberts, that the conservatives on the court will find anything less than that birthright citizenship is real. And Trump taking us down that path to satisfy John Eastman and Stephen Miller and, the more radical people in the anti-immigration caucus is a huge waste of America's political time.
Okay, so a few points. One, I believe that dissent is from where we get the phrase "two Wongs don't equal a white." But
I can't believe you went there. I think that line may appear in the Pat Morita episode of The Odd Couple, where Felix and Pat Morita are on the island.
Just to be clear, it's in the dissent because the dissent was wrong, right?
Yes,
so, I don't endorse that view. But
yes.
But then, second of all, look, I am perfectly willing to concede, and we did have a little exchange on text last night. there are a bunch of the executive orders that I like, that you like. I like my water pressure back. I mean, I don't know if he's the guy to do it. I want my incandescent light bulbs. That's great. I'm glad that he's making federal workers go back to work. Now, if he could just get rid of the bike lanes so traffic would get fixed in here, that's all great. As Mrs. Garrett says, you take the good, you take the bad, and take the rest, and there you have the facts of life, right? And so, like, there's some good, there's some bad, and there's some ugly in everything that Trump did yesterday. I want to throw you're a former presidential speechwriter, or White House speechwriter. I don't know if these distinctions
Presidential.
matter. Okay.
Presidential. Never wrote for anybody but a president. So
all right.
I'm sticking with that as my adjective.
And my colleague Sarah Isger had a take on, which I'm not sure is actually literally right, but I think it is sort of directionally a useful way to think about it. That that Trump's inaugural speech was sort of a hot mess for anyone listening to anybody listening to it straight through. As you said on your podcast, it sounded like they started over a couple times. But her point is, in an era where you are trying to get sound bites to send to a diverse coalition that you're going to promote on social media and micro target and send, 30 seconds to this group and have 10 seconds of this to begin the video for that group and that kind of thing, it makes it make a lot more sense as a mosaic or as a quilt, right, than as a seamless garment of literary expression. And I think that's true, where I think that I get it. There are a lot of people. I want Trump to succeed. I want America to succeed. All of that kind of stuff. And there are a lot of people who are. I stand by my characterization of you guys as unduly ebullient. Which is not to say that you endorse him.
I think you got to go down the hall at AEI and talk to Matt Continetti, who is, I think, on balance, far more positive than negative. I think I'm more in the middle. I don't believe that, we are somehow the Claremont Review made.
I'm not saying that
made neocon. Okay, I just wanted.
I'm not saying that. I just think that you guys you're looking for half full glasses where you can't, and that's fine. That's fine. That's what this period is supposed to be about, when presidents just get elected, right? So I'm not unduly harsh about all that. But
by the way, speaking as a former presidential speechwriter, if I could just interject that
yes.
there are many moments where classic tropes of a speaking rhetoric were attempted, like where he says things like, "We are going to rebalance, reframe, and redo da 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 da," and there was this huge failure in the middle. Agnew, a failure to pull off an Agnew, the famous nattering nabobs of negativism phrase, and Agnew's famous speech that William Safire wrote in 1969. Here's what Trump said. And so, Stephen Miller, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a B-. This was bad that you screwed this up. He said, "We have a government that cannot manage even a simple crisis at home, while at the same time stumbling into a continuing catalog of catastrophic events abroad." Okay, events, not the right word. If you're going to go with the C, you have to have calamities, a continuing catalog of catastrophic calamities abroad. And so, speaking as a presidential speechwriter, that failure, I think, may bode ill for the entire Trump administration, because we speechwriters believe that only speeches matter, and therefore, if you fail on your big leap, your big rhetorical leap, because you just didn't understand the need for the fourth C, I hold out very little hope for the rhetorical genius of the Trump administration.
I agree. I mean, it should have been like a chaotic cacophony of cacostocracies across the country, across the world.
Exactly.
All right.
Yes.
All right. And so, look, and I agree with you. Like, you're the one who first pointed out that Nat Glazer quote from early '90s that, like, I've quoted it several times now about the cities stopped doing what they were good at and started doing what they wanted to do, and that's how they got into trouble. And I agree with you that competence is key and all that. Where I get off of the boat, and I've heard this from a bunch of people. I gave Brad Todd, my CNN colleague, some grief about this morning. Is this belief that this 78-year-old guy, surrounded by yes men, validated by the universe in a way no politician has been in our lifetimes, or perhaps ever, in terms of getting back into the White House this way after everything that he's been through, is going to now pivot to being presidential and deny himself his instincts, when listening to his instincts are the one of the few ideological lodestars that this guy believes in. I mean, I've been saying character is destiny for a very long time. The idea that somehow now he's going to be the president for the whole country, or now that he's going to restrain himself, I just think is impossible to intellectually embrace as a serious hope. And I see it all over the place. People thinking like this time it's going to be different, when there is like literally, I mean, you guys,
we know it's not going to be different, right? We know he's talking about, taking the Panama Canal. Who had that on your bingo card just 3 weeks ago? Like, and that was in the inaugural. Like, he didn't talk. There were things he didn't talk about, and he talked about the unjust
territorial
Panama Canal.
expansion. Yeah.
Okay, territorial expansion. As you yourself have said, the Greenland idea is something that you have advocated.
For sure.
But not by force.
Not by force.
No, he wants to buy it. Harry Truman tried to give them.
He said he will not rule out. He said he will not rule out military force.
So literally, Harry Truman tried to use Dane Geld to buy. Literally in 1948, he was like, "Here's $100 million. We'll buy Greenland from you."
It was a great idea.
Denmark. It was, and we don't know why we don't even know why Denmark has legal possession of Greenland.
But here's the thing: that problem was solved 2 years later when Denmark became one of the founding members of NATO.
I know.
The things we wanted Greenland for, Denmark largely provided by becoming an ally.
Okay,
and Trump wants to ignore the ally thing.
I am not disagreeing with you. And if Greenland were to agree to a nice,
that'd be great.
$1 billion, subvention,
we could get $2 million per Greenlander and come out.
And and if they find rare earth minerals or something, maybe Greenland can get it. Denmark can get some kind of a perpetuity land lease deal, like the kind we hear about on the great show Landman, which I commend to everybody. Underground oil leases and stuff like that. But of course,
pickled herring for life, whatever they want.
Oh man, I just had some fantastic pickled herring, I have to tell you, and Dijon sauce was really great. The other day, it's amazing. Anyway, I just want to say, of course, he's himself. He's he wants to plant the flag on Mars. He's changing the Gulf of America, which will be known as the Gulf of America when the Tappan Zee Bridge is known as the Mario M. Cuomo Bridge, and the 59th Street Bridge is known as the Edward I.
When
Koch
people start
Bridge.
calling it Avenue of the Americas. Yeah,
exactly. Like, this is never going to happen. But so he is himself, and he will be himself, and his instincts will be, I don't need to listen to anybody. I'm the guy who made it back here against literally all odds that anybody could even possibly have imagined. And so my instincts are good and my instincts are sound. The question is, he may have these instincts that I'm talking about the governance stuff. Now, meaning he's got 4 years, right? Mm-hmm. So if he racks up some wins and the country is in better shape in 2029 than it was in 2025, he will have completed he is the, I don't know what you would call him. He's the Muhammad Ali. He's he's in a new realm of leadership. And so if he can redefine his actual successes that history will speak well of him for into a manageable framework, not I'm bringing peace to the globe and there will literally not be an illegal alien in America, but hey, look, I just deported 72 people. This is what happened with the hostages, by the way. 3 hostages are out. He's like, I've solved the hostage crisis in Israel. So there'll be one deportation round, and he'll be like, I deported all of the illegal aliens, right? So crowd size can go in many ways. He can't do crowd size with the inauguration. He could do crowd size with the deportations and basically claim victories and then get out. And he might have that instinct. Like, he is far less radical an actor than he is a rhetorician.
Mm-hmm.
That's his history. I would say arguably the most radical thing that he's ever done is what he did yesterday with the pardons. I think as a matter of governance, that is the most radical thing he has ever done. Can you think of anything he did as
Yeah, because
president that
I don't think you can call January 6th an act of governance, right? That
right
was
and it wasn't, and and that was what happened, was kind of improvisatory. I mean, in some sense, like, what was going to happen again, it was like, what if it had rained, or what, it wasn't like a planned, what
well,
happened there.
I think he
No,
deliberately was planning to steal the election. I mean, like he laid the
right,
groundwork on election night by saying this election was
I know.
stolen, and
No,
so
no,
like
right. No, but first of all, it didn't happen, and the pardons happened. So
yeah,
I'm just
right.
saying that's the most radical thing that he has ever done, and it is arguably the most offensive, not only because of its offense against law and custom and tradition, but it's offensive against his talking point that that we need to support the police, and he needs to restore law and order to the United States in these out of control cities. And that's not just about getting illegal immigrants out of shelters in cities. It is about rebalancing the criminal justice system, since away from, as you might say, wokeness, and a reappeal to scaring the crap out of people who want to be criminals and getting them to stop being criminals. Like, that's so this is very unhelpful to that mission, and is therefore, he did something that is injurious to himself. And by the way, a 2-to-1 issue against him.
Mhm.
According to the only poll we have on
The January 6th.
on January 6th, 2/3 of Americans said flatly to the Washington Post that they were opposed to pardons, and 30% said they were in favor. Generally speaking, a good politician who has his finger on the pulse of the people doesn't go with the 30%,
Mhm.
particularly when it's entirely elective. I know
And
there are
particularly
people
when
call it, yeah,
he could have gone 95% the way there, right? Which is
yeah,
like Mike Johnson and JD Vance within the last 10 days said
yeah,
flatly Trump will not pardon the people who were guilty of physically attacking police.
yeah,
Just said, and it made it, and it sort of rolled their eyes at, Kristen Welker, Mike Johnson did, at the idea that he would pardon people who attack police. And then he did
right,
exactly that. And he could have gone out to that line, gotten 100% support from the Republican caucus, not
yeah.
created problems for Republicans running, but he didn't do that. And I think there's profound moral hazard, dude. I want to get off keeping you in the
Okay.
dock and move on to something where there will be a true spirit of unanimity on. But I
Oh,
just will say
by the
that
way, before we go there, like,
uh-huh.
he is putting Vance and Johnson now in danger of being in the Mike Pence position. And what I
Oh, for
mean
sure.
by that is that Mike Pence, when he was running for vice president in 2016, Pence went to debates and gave speeches and did this through the presidency, where he said, Donald Trump believes in, a Christian America, whatever. And he was describing a person that didn't exist. He just
Right.
willed a fake version of Donald Trump into existence and praised that person. And Vance, who's a very interesting, and very formidable political force, I think it's going to be interesting to see where he goes with this, because he was like, of course he's not going to pardon
Right.
violent criminals. And then he pardoned hundreds of violent criminals. So he, of course, has to now rebalance himself to get into that. Is he going to continue following this approach of saying, of course, Trump's not going to be irresponsible and crazy, and then Trump does something irresponsible and crazy? Or is he going to like hold his powder dry and wait till Trump talks and then echo? And we'll see where that goes. It's a very hard hand to play in some ways.
No, I look,
That's all I wanted to. Yeah.
and that sinking feeling. You can almost hear the 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 sphincters of congressional Republicans tightening across Washington this morning, because they're now realizing, they just did it to Rubio this morning, of respond to what Donald Trump said or did, right? And they hate having to do that because they're on record saying X, and then Trump does Y, and then they have to spin around, and it dampens it lowers the value of their manhood on the meme market, as it were.
Right.
But so
Okay.
the one thing, just so I can sleep well knowing that I fought this good fight with you. I think that if you go back and you listen to the first 15, 20 minutes of the commentary podcast about this, you will find indicia that not to use a Noah Rothman word, that you guys were flirting perilously close, and maybe it was just the always effervescent Matt Continetti, but you guys were flirting perilously close to saying he's a new man. He has been vindicated. He no longer has to be the man he was, because he now has he's won, and he's been proven right, and his detractors wrong, and yada yada yada. And that is what I was referring to when I was saying waiting for Trump to be a better man is like waiting for Godot, right? It's just not going to happen. He is who he is. The scorpion must sting the frog. Trump must be Trump. He will be Trump again. And I think any analysis that ever varies from that fundamental truth, for good or for ill, right? Because there are things that people can celebrate about the permanent nature of Donald Trump's character. But to think that like he is going to take the high road for a sustainable period of time is inconceivable to me.
I said I will not be accused of saying that he will ever take the high road. He will never take the high road. What I said, and what I believe to be the case, is that he thought that 2016 was a fluke. He came into office thinking that he had won as a result of a fluke. This is the opposite of a fluke.
That's true.
He had the entire world coming down on his shoulders. He beat off, 7 legal cases that were aimed directly at his jugular. He survived an assassination attempt. He won the popular vote. He won the 7 swing states. He comes into office not as a different man, because he thinks that that's why he won, right? He thinks he won because of who he is, but his mien can be different. He is the ultimate winner. All he cares about is winning and losing. He is the ultimate winner. They have come at him and come at it. He was impeached twice. He was assassinated. He was shot at once. A guy was going to shoot at him a second time on his golf course. 7 legal cases against him. One of them is now, is still in existence. But I'm just saying that whatever challenges to his manhood or his sense of himself, or the idea that he's a loser or a winner, he is the biggest winner of our lifetimes, as far as I can tell, in some calculus.
Sure. No, I agree with that.
So that's gotta affect a person's daily, how they walk through life. I mean, sometimes it depresses people. It's sometimes it's now what do I do? I just survived, I'm like you. I just got through Scylla and Charybdis, and I survived. Now what do I do? Now what mountain do I climb? Or now what's my challenge? So I guess he could invent one. He could create a crisis that he could live through. Clinton seemed to do that on a regular basis. He was like Fran Tarkenton. It's I'm bored. I think I'll just go molest an intern and see what happens. It's Bill Clinton, all you had to do was not molest, leave everybody alone for 8 years, and you were going to have a successful presidency. It's nah, you know what? There's that cute 21-year-old girl. I think I'll
play Baron and the Milkmaid.
Put Baron and the Milkmaid on her dress and see what happens. I just think that's an interesting, it's so he could create crises to surmount, He could go in search of monsters to slay, as George Washington. Was it John Adams?
I think it was John Adams. But
okay, anyway, you could go search for monsters to slay, or he could enjoy his victory. I don't think enjoying is his big forte, but anyway, we'll see.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
I understand. He could.
Okay.
If he had wheels, he could be a bus.
Okay.
My point is just simply that I think what he's taken from this, understandably, is what he's taken from so much else in his life, is that he did things that everyone says he can't do and that won't work, and they worked for him. He's the monkey who bangs out War and Peace on the typewriter, right? He's the millionth monkey. And his takeaway from that is his instincts are always right. And so his instincts are not going to be, I must be the new Mitch Daniels, right?
No,
He's
of course not.
So
of course not.
And so
that's why he wants green. That's why he wants the Panama Canal and the External Revenue Service and and Doge, and he wants to be new. He wants to make new things and have new things happen, and that is very dangerous. It is an unconservative impulse. He's the head of the Conservative Party in the United States and is remaking it in his own image into something totally incoherent and impossible to understand. I love reading, when people say, I really like it if we got back to like thinking about deficit reduction. And I'm like, yeah, you know what I would really like? I'd like to go back in time and have the Atari game system not be invented so that kids 40 years later, aren't like living on their phones. Like that would be great, but that's not going to happen. Like he's not interested in deficit reduction. He is now all committed to the idea that economic growth is going to save him and save everybody and outdistance everything, and that's all good. And so, it is funny to see people just kind of try to shoehorn in the old Republican consensus, and it's like, boy, it would be great if vaudeville came back. It's like, okay, where is Jack Benny? That's what we need, is somebody like Jack Benny,
So I want to get to Biden for a second, then we got to talk about Israel. But as you know, I cannot let go of my complaint that people use neocon wrong, right? And for those who don't know this history, you can correct me. You know this history is about as well as anybody does, but this is one of my obsessions. The original wave of neocons were more like the Nat Glazer neocon, like with the urban reform, renewal kind of stuff, rejecting things like the excesses of the Great Society, the public interest, which predated, the sort of 1970s neocons by almost a decade. It was James Q. Wilson, Nat Glazer, those guys writing about, almost literally only about domestic policy, right? And my view is that neoconservatism, as originally understood, was basically a sociological phenomenon of disillusionment with the utopianism of the left or with communism or whatever. I can do chapter and verse about how a lot of the original founders of National Review were essentially neocons before the term existed, James Burnham and all that crap. The second wave of neocons, which were led essentially by commentary and your dad, were the foreign policy neocons. And when you guys, or I shouldn't say you guys, but when the commentary neocons got in, National Review ran a little editorial squib in 1973 saying, come on in, the water's fine, right? And this is where my old boss, Ben Wattenberg, was part of all that. Richard Pearl, Scoop Jackson was the political leader, the head of it. Moynihan kind of bridged the domestic and the foreign thing. And so anyway, my point is that, first of all, neocon doesn't mean foreign policy hawk primarily, or originally didn't. Now it kind of does. Okay, we have to live in that world. But the foreign policy hawk thing, the neocons were talking about fully funding the Congress for Cultural Freedom and like Radio Free Europe and that kind of stuff, right? Winning hearts and minds.
Radio Marti.
Right. Meanwhile,
Radio Marti, floating on Radio Marti, which was supposed to be a liberation radio service and did exist for Cuba,
right?
Which would only work if you had Zeppelins broadcasting down on Cuba.
So the Goldwater crowd, meanwhile, was all in favor of rollback, not containment, right?
Right.
And yet somehow the Jews, for the most part, the neocons get called these bloody hawk militant types, right? Which we got a revival of in this latest Republican primary season. And the MAGA people love to talk about how the neocons are warmongers. Liz Cheney is a warmonger, right? Blah, blah, blah. What friggin' neocon was talking about taking back the Panama Canal or Greenland by force. I mean, does it bother you at all that like somehow like these guys are proposing things that no warmongering neocon would ever have suggested? And
Yeah.
they still get to claim to be the non-interventionists and the ones who are opposed to war?
Well, thank you. Yes. I'm in complete agreement. Here's my 2-minute thing on this, which is take Ukraine as the best example, right? We're warmongers because we support the effort, United States backing the Ukrainians in their effort to turn back the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We were warmongers because we opposed the pullout from Afghanistan that Trump supported before Biden actually executed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
The difference between the containment people who were the neocons in foreign policy, that is, the neocons were not rollback people, they were containment people. This is a debate so arcane now that it's almost ridiculous. But the idea was you can't roll back. It's too dangerous to attempt to roll back the Soviets. You can't do it. They have nuclear weapons. They're very aggressive. And but if you try to hold them in place and keep them contained, they will fall apart of their own internal contradictions. That was the argument in the original containment argument by George Kennan in 1947. And it turned out to be true.
Right.
That is, we spent 40 years saying, no, you can't go in here. No, you can't go there. We don't like it once you do it. And if you do it, there's not that much we can do about it. If you're going to spend money to take over Nicaragua, we're not going to invade Nicaragua. We're not going to invade Cuba, even if it's 90 miles off our shore. We're not going to help the Hungarians if you roll tanks into Hungary or into Prague or into Poland. That's too dangerous. But we will support what we can support and do what we can do, right? That was because that's the lowest cost, highest return. Staying in Afghanistan was low cost, high return. Nobody was dying. No Americans were dying. And it was like we had a finger in a dike. And we were like, no, it's been too long, 20 years. We'll just pull the finger out of the dike and see what happens. And what happened was the world caught on fire. Not only was that pullout like a disaster, it gave Putin a kind of implicit green light to go into Ukraine. You could even say that it may have given Hamas an implicit green light to go into the kibbutzim, simply because America was signaling that it was no longer an active participant in the effort to keep the world in order, right? So the Afghanistan position, and Trump says, was the worst pullout ever and all, Biden's terrible because he can say that, was, no, we stay there because it's too expensive to leave and it's reasonably cheap to stay. And Ukraine is the ultimate version of that argument. We're not fighting there. We're not going there. If we give the Ukrainians as much as we possibly can, they're already showing that they have the means, the method, the opportunity, and the bravery to fight this. All we got to do is give them stuff. We're staying on the periphery. We're going to give them stuff. That's cheap. That doesn't cost us anything. We save NATO at very low cost. We punish Putin for breaking an 80-year norm. And they're the ones who are calling us warmongers. Like, we're against America being involved in a war with Russia. That's why we support the Ukrainians doing it for themselves.
Right.
This is insane. It's low cost.
But
yes,
I agree
offended?
entirely on the Ukraine stuff.
That's
but
all
then
I'm
the
saying.
same people
when
are like,
people like Vance say, I don't care about Ukraine.
The Panama Canal.
yeah. That now they're going to take the Panama Canal. Also, what do we need with the Panama Canal? Number one. And number two, by the way, yes, 38,000 people, as Trump said, died building the Panama Canal. Most of them weren't Americans, number one, and they died from mosquitoes. And it's not like they died fighting to take the land in Panama to build the Panama Canal. They died of malaria. So, it's not like our blood and treasure went into building the Panama Canal. It's like, we had this debate 50 years ago. and they give the retrocess the Panama Canal back to Panama, won the debate. And so I don't know why he's gone there. I don't know why I don't know why he cares. I don't know what we need with it. We already, by the way, went into Panama. People have already forgotten. We went into Panama to ensure the security and safety of the Panama Canal, to get Noriega out of Panama, because he was like
Right.
starting to threaten the sea lane in Panama. The United States committed blood and treasure to saving Panama from a dictatorial pseudo-communist takeover 36 years ago.
So Nick Catoggio, my colleague at the Dispatch, who I don't think can be fairly accused of Podhoretz Continetti-style effervescence about the second Trump administration.
Yes, I would say he is.
He argues in part that that this is, in some ways, the natural consequence of nationalism, right? Of the kind of of the MAGA nationalism, nationalist movements, when they have the chance, need territorial expansion to validate the internal logic. And I'm not sure I go as far as to say that it's inevitable or that that's definitely the explanation, but I do think it's something worth thinking about. I also think you cannot wholly discount Putin envy. That Trump looks at Putin, looks at Xi, says this is the kind of thing that really strong, viral or virile leaders do, and I should do it too. I'm not saying that's it. I'm also just saying you cannot blithely discount it either.
Okay, so I think Nick is brilliant. I think he's a little over emotional on some of these things. I don't think that territorial expansion of the United States is a completely logical outgrowth of nationalism, because part of, you could say, by the way, that a liberal trade policy that Trump is now opposing, right, is a form of American expansion, right? I mean, we are liberal trade policies are not just about letting things into the United States so that other countries can get a trade deficit with us. It is also about our reaching out across the entire planet with our ideas about how economies should work that make the world safer for the United States in the long run. It's a kind of philosophical American expansion. Trump's a real estate guy. He would like to claim some territory, clearly, if he could. Again, the Panama Canal. Okay, so this is a good explanation in some ways philosophically, because frankly, I don't know what the hell Trump is doing. So maybe if you can root it in some kind of weird atavistic, almost, animalistic response to his own nationalism and populism, it was ours. We gave it away for nothing. Why did we do that? Right? We're going to take it back. I suppose maybe that helps explain why we're suddenly talking about the Panama Canal, which again was on nobody's bingo card 2 months ago.
Right.
And as I think a liberal I was talking to yesterday said, it's like, he didn't run on this. Like, he ran on, I'm going to beat inflation. He barely talked about inflation yesterday, and he talked about the Panama Canal in the inaugural speech. So either it's a kind of weird misdirection in that way. It's like, so he likes to create things. So, and that's bad, right? We're small government people, so we don't want, I don't need a Department of Government Efficiency, because that's a new government department. I don't believe in new government departments. And there are departments in the government, by the way, that he could have used. There are offices in the White House that essentially are supposed to do this. He could have just named somebody to run one of those offices. But like, I don't need Space Force. I don't, that's him. That's him making things up and making the government bigger, not smaller. So, as I say, that's where the conservative embrace of him among people who used to say that, it's like, cracks me up. Kevin Roberts of the Heritage Foundation's like, I got into government. I got into this by being on Pat Buchanan's. I went into the Pat Buchanan campaign. That's how and this is now the fulfillment of all those ideas that we had back then. Pat Buchanan was a small government conservative who suddenly discovered in New Hampshire that there were poor white people, and that, maybe, and poor white people, not just because of black people, which is what he thought was the case until then, but that there were poor white people because of bad trade deals or something like that. And suddenly his politics expanded in that way. But generally, we were all against the expansion of government. And there's Trump wanting to expand things. Territorial expansion would be the least offensive to me. I don't want the federal government to be bigger. If we could buy Greenland, that's fine with me. I got no problem with buying Greenland, and you have no problem with buying Greenland.
No, none. Yeah, none.
Okay. We got to buy it.
We got to buy it, right.
We're not going to invade it.
It's got to be voluntary. Yeah.
And he's not going to invade it anyway. What he said was, in that press conference, somebody said to him, "Will you promise not to invade Greenland?" And he said, "I'm not making any promises." I mean, it's not like he said, "And we will invade Greenland if Denmark doesn't give us Greenland." Anyway, not that I'm going to defend him here. I don't know what the hell is going on. This is ridiculous. Right. I don't know why we're talking. Anyway, okay.
Okay, so let's very quickly, because got a couple other things we got to do. So I will say that, and I'm so glad I wrote the column. I originally did it kind of tongue-in-cheek, and then the reaction to it made me think, no, actually, no tongue-in-cheek. I actually think Joe Biden should have been impeached for pardoning Hunter. And I mean that very sincerely. If you go back and you read what Madison said about abuse of pardons when they were ratifying the Constitution, pardoning Hunter fits perfectly into it. Pardoning his entire family fits perfectly into it. Glibly just asserting that the ERA is a constitutional amendment, I think, is impeachable. I mean, I think it's impeachable. I think it's fairly impeachable, and it would have been good for the country to impeach him for those things, because that would have put a constraint on Trump for pardoning, goons who, at his direction, at least emotionally,
because he would have had to support that impeachment.
Laid siege to the Capitol.
Yeah.
And so yesterday, there was a moment where the Venn diagram of my contempt for both parties for a while looked like two moons converging each other over Andor or something, until basically it was just one object, because I was so disgusted with both parties. And I now come down to the belief that at the very minimum, we should amend the Constitution to say the presidents can't use the pardon power after an election in their second term, at least, right? But really, I'm kind of with Andy McCarthy on this. I think, when the pardon power was first created, there were only 3 federal crimes, and we never intended for this kind of thing to happen, and it's time for it to go, because this is just abhorrent. Do you think that Joe Biden will go down as more lawless than Donald Trump?
I think that your colleague, Sarah Isker, wrote a brilliant piece that was published on Monday, arguing that before these pardons,
right,
that he is arguably the most lawless president in history. It's I think, an airtight case, because his lawlessness begins at the beginning of his administration, and it is shot through from top to bottom. So not only do we have this abuse of the pardon power at the end, Hunter, then his family, not only do we have what Obama and Trump did, which is doing patently unconstitutional things, legislating from the Oval Office using executive orders and having the Supreme Court slap them down, right? So Obama was DACA, and Biden was the student loans and various other things. Not only did he use the emergency powers as a result of the pandemic to suspend rent payments and authorize federal agencies to involve themselves in local economic decision making and school local school actions and things like that, and use the power of the Centers for Disease Control to suspend evictions and things like that. So we have a kind of regulatory abuses of power, these patently unconstitutional assertions of executive authority, and now this abuse of the pardon power. That's kind of new. In other words, have it like throughout the model of the presidency, which is I will do what I want to do, or I will approve things that I want to approve, that until 3 seconds ago, everybody would have recognized as being beyond the writ, the mandate, or the just administration of the laws that he swears to uphold. And therefore, yeah, he is the most lawless president in history. And I think that's not going to be a particularly controversial opinion 10 years from now. By which I mean, I think the totality of the administration, also because it was a failure, and therefore its defenders will be few. It's going to be very hard to say, did they overreact to COVID? Yes. Did they having the military fire people because they would not voluntarily take a vaccine? Is that legitimate? Is it legitimate to, sort of like, there are all kinds of things that happened that, adults, the limitation of civil liberties and all of that are going to be indefensible. And so he could have been impeached 10 times in some ways, who knows? He wasn't, because the fact is that I think Republicans understood that impeachment, as demonstrated in the Democratic impeachments of Trump, has a boomeranging political effect, or can have a boomerang, that it rallies. Democrats were divided, depressed. They didn't like Biden. They thought the country was on the wrong track. And then, had they impeached him, maybe there would have been a complete rallying to Biden's side, and a sense that, these people had to be stopped, because they would stop at nothing, which is exactly what happened both in the Trump impeachments and in the Clinton impeachment, which you know more about than I do. But I mean, like, the Clinton impeachment was, he was popular, he was fine, Democrats liked him fine. They were very unnerved and rattled by Lewinsky, and then the Republicans started coming at him, and then they all just kind of like glommed onto him and surrounded him and provided a phalanx for him. Imagine a world in which Clinton had not been attacked, sort of like politically, but had been left simply to the press's own devices. Who knows where that would have been? So I think Republicans were wise not to impeach Biden as a matter of practical course. I think they would have been within their rights, and they should have done it after Hunter, because why the hell not? But they obviously,
I mean, again, I want to be clear. I agree. It would be politically fraught to do it and all these kinds of things. But like, we've so ruined what impeachment was for and what it was intended to do, that at least getting it out there that it's clear what an impeachable offense properly is useful. I hadn't really thought about like Biden's defenders in the future, because there'll be so few. I think it's worse than that. I think his biggest problem is that, because when you say, or when Sarah says he'll go down in history as the most lawless president, there is a reasonable counter to that to say, well, watch Donald Trump say, "Hold my beer," right? Because who knows what he's going to do over the next 4 years.
That's true. That's true.
But the thing is, the more Trump is lawless, the worse it is for Biden. Because first of all, he had one job, which is to prevent Trump from being president ever again.
Yeah.
And he failed, and the left will never forgive him for that.
Yeah.
And two, the more lawless Trump is, and the more they say, well, look, Biden did it first, the more you're going to get sort of bedwetter New York Times Magazine pieces saying, his heart may have been in the right place, but the precedent that Joe Biden set is one of the reasons why Trump is doing X, Y, and Z. And you could see that the 1-2 punch of blaming him for Trump being president, and then the fact that he gave Trump excuses for doing stuff that the left hates, could really turn him into a pariah figure as a historical figure.
I think that's almost inevitable. I mean, I think it's almost inevitable. Also, because the more you can blame one guy, the less you have to evaluate what your responsibility is for the negative turn in your fortunes. And the Democratic Party is in desperate need of looking hard at that, and they have every incentive not to, if they can just pin it on Biden and say it was Biden, his age, and blah blah blah. And look, Harris did better than Biden would have done. And no, we aren't. The American people haven't rejected us. And I actually think if you look at this map in the New York Times that was published on Saturday, which is like literally precinct by precinct, practically block by block across the United States, of the difference between 20 and 24 in every precinct across the country, and the map is red. What I mean by that is there is no place in the think about this. There's no place in the United States that moved toward the Democrats. Literally, there is not a blue spot on that map. Biden, like in my neighborhood, right? Your old neighborhood, we live in the, it was Hillary won 89-10, Biden won 92-7, and then Trump, and then Harris won 87-11 or 12 or something like that. It moved toward Trump. Like, it's not like it won. Like Trump was blown out the same way. We're talking about hundreds of voters. But if people move toward Trump in this neighborhood, they move toward Trump every single place in the United States. Was that about Trump? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that was about other stuff, and they are on a knife's edge. And if they can grasp onto because Democrats did this in 80 until the early 90s, say it was just Carter.
Right.
And there's a lot of unfair stuff. Like, if only the Soviets had behaved, Carter would still be or if only this, or if only that, or if only the other thing. And you know what? He even did the good stuff, and he didn't get credit. He appointed Volcker, he deregulated, he did this, but he doesn't get credit, and Reagan gets all the credit, blah, 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 blah. So they could just, whatever, or they could just blame Carter and then say 4 years later, Carter, let's nominate Carter's vice president and have him say, I'm going to raise taxes.
Right.
That's my strategy for winning the country back in 1984. You're bringing back Jimmy Carter, and I'm going to raise taxes. 49 states. So.
So in terms of, you brought up assigning credit or blame appropriately. I think it's weird. In the remaining minutes that we have here, I think it's weird that both Trump and Biden bickered about who deserved sole credit for this hostage deal. I listened to you guys about this. I understand that like this hostage deal, the pressure for it comes from a whole bunch of different places, including the Israeli public and blah 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 blah. But it's not a great deal. I think I'm on solid ground about that. And if I were either of them, first of all, it would be good for the country to make it sound like it was a bipartisan thing. But also, it would be good to have some cover to say, hey, the other side was in on this too, because there's a very good chance that this deal does not look good. That this is the best this deal is going to look, right? Or am I being unfair? Is there merit to this deal that I am not seeing? What is your just sort of your basic take on what's going on in Israel right now?
My basic take is that after 15 months, the exhaustion, the emotional toll of the war has made this deal almost inevitable if it could happen. Because the Israelis got a shot in the arm about their own national self-confidence in the summer and the fall with the amazing, sort of like the beeper, the pager, the campaign against Hezbollah, the assassination inside Iran of Hamas's chief, various other things that went on. that they suddenly had, and that they had moved on Rafah and taken and then killed Sinwar, the head of Hamas, and all of that. And then as December rolled around, as people were telling me, my sister was telling me, as friends who were traveling there telling me, were saying, they've fallen back into despair. Like, it's just so grueling. And, people, reservists, it's a small country of 900,000. So they have a very large reservist corps. My nephew's in that reservist corps. He's almost 40 years old. He was in there for 200 days. Like, it's so much. It's so much. It's so much. And the hostages are the image of the horror. And so when Hamas started to move, when Trump said, you better make a deal or there's going to be hell to pay, and somehow things started to crack open, the deal was inevitable. It's a bad deal. The Israelis, by the way, know it's a bad. Nobody thinks that this is a good deal and it isn't going to lead to more suffering, or that there's a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen, because all we know is in the next 40 days that another 30 hostages are going to come out. There are 98. Some of them are dead. All we know is 30. There are 3 came out, and there are 33 that are supposed to be released in total in 7 weeks or 6 weeks. And then the question is, what happens to the rest, and does the war restart, and all of that. And of course, if the war restarts, that's the end of hostages coming out, and whatever that means. And so the anxiety level is not alleviated by anything that's going on here in terms of Israel. Yeah, and if I were, and the danger to Israel is Trump's inconstancy, by which I mean, if he's too interested in taking credit for the hostage deal, and Hamas starts playing games and violates the terms of the ceasefire, or says they're not going to let hostages out, or does X, Y, or Z, and Israel says 6 weeks from now, Hamas, we are now going to destroy Hamas. And you know what? We're going to destroy as much as we can in Iran for equal measure, because that's why this is all happening. And Trump is like, no, I'm sorry. This is my deal. I'm happy with this deal. And, I've already told everybody that it was a good deal, and you're going to make me look foolish and stupid. So you better not do it. Then Bibi Netanyahu is caught between a rock and a hard place. And he will anger Trump if Trump says don't do it, and he will fall if he doesn't do it. And so there is no relief for anybody who really cares about this. The relief is the three girls who came out and their families, and that is not to be sneezed at. But of course, the horror is this fact: 1,900 Palestinian prisoners are due to be released if all the hostages are released. 90 came out in exchange for the 3. How many thousands of Israelis are going to die over the next 25 years because those 1,900 were released? And everybody in Israel knows that there is going to be a death toll as a result of this deal, because every time there has been a prisoner exchange, something terrible has happened. Of course, the biggest one is that Yahya Sinwar came out of an Israeli prison in exchange for Gilad Shalit, and 12 years later designed and led the attack on Israel on October 7th. So one person gets out, takes over Hamas, designs this operation, pulls it off, and they're going to let 1,900 of them out. Now, maybe Israel can destroy Palestinian nationalism or this terrorist world because of its actions over the next 3 to 6 months, and therefore really cause a kind of despair. But you've got to take the conservative view. The conservative view is there is this death cult, murder cult, that is part and parcel of Palestinian culture, and it will continue to operate. And that the cost of the release of these people will be the death of people whom no one knows are going to die yet. And in way larger numbers than the 98 who are going to get out. And so the exchange is a tragic exchange. And like, you understand it, and there's no way around it. And this is the tragedy of Israeli life and Israeli history. And in fact, Jewish custom, which is that you are supposed to ransom for hostages if your
Right.
people are taken. That is part and parcel. It's not exactly law, but it is sort of like near law, let's say. And so that puts anybody who wants to attack Jews in a very felicitous position, because if they take them, then Israel has this moral obligation, according to our own ancient traditions, of ransoming them. And so, that is very dangerous. And there's been a lot of debate over the last 60 years inside Israel about this. And I don't know where this is going to go after this time, because Israel often found a way out. Like the Entebbe raid was the way out of the conversation about ransoming hostages. And they thought maybe they could do that here too. And then in September, they got within 50 yards of 6 hostages, and Hamas executed them all.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, these operations are not going to work. Rescue operations inside the tunnels are not going to work. So that option seemed to have been taken off the table. And so Israel's hope that it had a third way, that it had the miraculous Entebbe example that was going to take place as they destroyed Hamas, just didn't come into being. And that's where Israel lies now. So but yeah, if I were Trump, I would keep my distance. But again, Trump is Trump. So he takes credit for, it's like claiming you're going to build a building on a site that you don't even have yet. So he's already claimed victory in the hostage negotiations with 3 of the 98 out, and no assurance that anybody else is coming out.
After saying there would be hell to pay if they weren't all released before he was elected.
Right. So suddenly it was like, oh, well, a deal is a deal. And when he sent his friend Steve Witkoff over to negotiate, whom did Steve Witkoff bully into accepting the deal? It wasn't Hamas, it wasn't the Qataris, it was Bibi Netanyahu. And he said, you better do this. You better do this. Like, get out of bed. You're recovering from prostate cancer surgery? I don't care. Get out of bed and make this deal. Like, this was not done to further Israel's interests, let's just say.
Yeah, I mean, there's an analog to it in sort of the way Trump talks about trade, right? It was just sort of like, you actually get a reaction from bullying your friends that you can't get from bullying your enemies, because you can't bully your enemies in the same way. And so, or how he treats Republicans, right, is like, he knows he has a superpower to sort of push around and jeopardize his friends. He has much less power over his enemies. And so it's like the drunk looking for his car keys where the light is good. He concentrates the place where the pieces can be moved, and the pieces can be moved to the people who have similar fan bases.
And listen, Israel loves Trump. I mean, when I say Israel, I mean, people don't really, Israelis loved, first of all, they were very, very, very grateful to Biden in the first 2 or 3 months of the war. Biden came to Israel, he set him on your side, he positioned carriers off of Lebanon to keep Hezbollah from entering the war to the extent that they could. He supported them and all that, until people started saying, Dearborn, Michigan, there's a lot of trouble there, and all of that. They loved, but then they were disillusioned by Biden. And, Trump is an enormously popular figure in Israel, like way more than here or practically anywhere else on earth, because of the Abraham Accords, because he said, I am tilting American policy toward Israel.
Right.
I am not an honest broker here. And that's not what he said during the 2016 campaign. He changed policy. He went in this direction. He gave Jared Kushner the portfolio. And so Israel is very grateful to him and loves him. And he knows that. And so it's not only that he can bully Bibi, but that he actually has greater support in Israel than Bibi does, or than any Israeli politician does. And so I don't know if they can say, people who sort of want this deal, look, we can't anger Trump, he's too important to us, and he wants us to continue with the ceasefire, and a lot of people don't want to keep fighting the war. So I don't know. I'm just saying the right position to take is to not be triumphalist, because you'll be sorry if you're triumphalist. Whether or not it is to be accepting, whether or not it is to be critical, all of that sort of matters, in a day-by-day fashion, as far as I can tell. But yesterday, Mike Huckabee went on Fox.
All right, my friend. I think we got to call it there.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. I didn't mean to
No, I'm sorry. I'm a bore, so I kept talking. You had to stop.
No, it's fine. I didn't want to interrupt your celebrations about the new Trump administration. So, with my crushing morosity, I am stealing your crushing morosity beat.
Yeah, you can't be more crushingly morose than I am right now about the hostage deal. So I will end on saying that my crushing morosity extends to the hostage deal.
Okay, actually, since we should do a little gloppish thing here. So, like, you Landman, you like Landman?
I love Landman.
I watched Landman. I like it a lot. I think the writing sometimes lags. I think it's fair to say. But Billy Bob Thornton carries the show immensely. I know you had this cover story about Taylor Sheridan and all this kind of stuff, and like the degree to which, I mean, it is almost like a 1930s WPA play, or like a Trotskyite play, where like there are times where they might as well just turn to the camera and say, yes, oil makes the world go round, and these people who don't appreciate it should go to hell. It's kind of awesome, and it's didactic, kind of like heavy-handedness. But I'm curious, what do you make of the, like, I love the oil stuff, right? Fine. I'm totally down for that. That's great. Second to the lecturing about oil is the lecturing about refined sugars that I find really fascinating. Like, how does that fit into sort of the MAGA valence kind of scenario?
Well, it's Maha, right? It's about MAGA to Maha.
Guess. Yeah, I guess.
I mean, I don't know if it's lecturing, because it is. They are. There's far more ambiguity about the question of whether refined sugars are bad for you, and whether this hot ex-wife who is making you eat better is being intrusive on your manhood, or whether she's right and you're wrong, than there is about the oil, which is unambiguous. It's like, right. Oh yeah, you want to be a green? Oh yeah, windmills. You know what happens to the whales? You know what happens? You know what happens? You know how much oil it takes to run a windmill, to run a wind farm? Huh? You know what I know? You want to know? It's kind of amazing. I've never seen anything like it. You are right. It's like some reverse Waiting for Lefty. Yeah. Or something like that, where people start, instead of shouting strike, strike, strike at the end of the show, it's like drill, drill, drill. Drill, baby, drill, like Trump said in the inaugural. So it's very singular, but Sheridan's politics are very. I mean, he is a Jeffersonian Jacksonian. I mean, that is if there can be such a person in American life now, he is the living representative of the cities are bad. Countries are, people who ride horses are better than people who do other things, and being a man is very important. Being manly and being full of manhood and having your pile and doing your thing and having a little lease is very proud. All of that kind of Jeffersonian. The Jacksonian stuff is like, screw it, we'll just take all of it.
Yeah, I mean, just Lioness in a lot of ways is the more of the Jacksonian stuff.
Oh yeah, totally.
Which I think is a good show. The other thing I just think is absolutely brilliant, and kudos to the people at Michelob for agreeing to go along with it. So I like Michelob Ultra, right? It satisfies my desire for beer without like all that stuff. My wife hates it and like looks at me like I'm 3 inches from a gender change whenever I drink it or bring it home. And but so at first the product placement for the Michelob Ultra in this show was so over the top. I was like, this is appalling. And then it turns out that like the running gag is that it's not really beer. Right. That it's so weak that this alcoholic can drink it safely.
It's like, I don't drink. I only drink Michelob Ultra.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I think it's one of the most brilliant pieces of product placement. And the courage of whoever it was at Michelob to allow their beer
Yeah.
to be sold as non-beer
Yeah.
on this manhood show.
But not only that, but I saw during one of the football games this weekend that Michelob Ultra is now literally doing commercials based on this theme. So either this is a long-term strategy, or they watched Landman take off and went, we better play right into this. Yeah, Billy Bob Thornton keeps saying, I'm an alcoholic, and someone says, but you're drinking Michelob Ultra, and he's like, that's not beer. Like it is. And by the way, I think like is a brilliant piece of characterization. In the end, this is a show about, like all good television shows, it's a show about the characters that you're watching. And that character, his character, Tommy, is Tommy Norris, is one of the great TV characters, as far as I can tell. I don't know where the show is going to go from here or how interesting it's going to be, but he's a great character. John Hamm's character, Monty, the head of the oil company, is fantastic. Everybody is fantastic.
I mean, the whorishness of the daughter,
the attitudes toward women, again, have about it a deeply Trumpian quality, which is don't tell me that I can't ogle a pretty girl. I'm ogling a pretty girl, and she could be 17 or she could be 47. Could be her mother, could be the daughter. I'm ogling, and there it's ogle time. And so that is, again, like, don't hand me your crap about this. Like, this is TV, and there's a pretty girl named Michelle Randolph, and she is going to wear Daisy Dukes and very, very low-cut shirts, and you are going to enjoy it immensely.
Yeah. All right, my friend. So, that was more uplifting than Israel or dystopian nationalism at home. Thank you for doing this, as always, and of course, we'll have you back.
And I hope you will join me at some point on the Commentary podcast to attack us for our exuberance. For our irrational exuberance.
I will be happy to do it. I'm going to go down the hall and mock Continetti for and tell him to take that giant foam Trump number one thing off his hand and stop waving it around. All right. Thanks, man.